We're going to get started a couple minutes early, in a couple minutes. As the wise American philosopher said, I've got a long way to go and a short time to get there. So. We have the handouts there on the table in the center aisle, in case anyone, you guys up there are out of luck, but I got you covered. Well, I want to thank all of you for being here today. Oh, good morning, everyone. Okay, not bad. I thought this would be the next to last week. I was informed that Jonathan and I will also be given the first week in May, so I have a little bit of breathing room to get in all I hope to get in. Pastor Gary was mentioning earlier in his message about his self-consciousness and how he could hide his height with the video, and I'm thinking, you should be so lucky. My self-conscious issues can't really do much about. They say that the camera adds 10 pounds, and I'm up here looking around for the other 8 cameras that are hidden around somewhere. But I'm going to work on that. But wasn't that a great message, though, this morning about Christians feeling beleaguered, feeling attacked? Of course, we don't have it anywhere close to what third world churches have it, underground churches and things like that. But I have to confess to feeling a little besieged by it all, and that's just after 30 seconds on Twitter or watching the news. But it is great to realize, to believe, to know that we are on the right side of eternity. Never mind history. Who would have thought I would ever say that? But let's go ahead and open in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, just so thankful to be here today. I was coming in this morning the same time as a bunch of other people. We all came here at the same time, and it just struck me at that moment how wonderful it is to be among a body of believers, that we have the freedom to congregate, to fellowship together, and to worship you and learn from your word. And as I say most every week, I pray that's something we never take for granted. I pray that you be with the classes that are going on now, including this one. I pray, as Pastor said, that all of our boasting would be in you. All of our hope is in you, and our rejoicing is in you too. We thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Now, normally at this part, at the very beginning, I run a Babylon Bee article before you. I'm not doing that this week. I have something better, actually. This is my candidate, my vote, for the greatest tweet of all time. Now, it's not the first one I'm going to show you. It's the response to it, all right? Back in January, when they passed the COVID stimulus bill, the $1.9 trillion, and everybody was complaining about the national debt. Remember when the national debt used to be a thing, 15 or 20 years ago? So anyway, people were complaining about what this would do to the debt, and this person, his name was Cameron Bradford, tweeted this: "We should just pin all the debt in the world to one guy and then kill him." Now, you know where this is going. This is the greatest tweet of all time. A pastor down in Alabama, Nathan White, replied, "I'm a pastor, and pal, have I got some good news for you." I just thought that was outstanding. All right. I can see here that I didn't separate my "who said it" quote, so as soon as I show you the slide, it's going to show you who did it. So I'll read it to you now, see if you can guess just by me reading it to you. Since we're talking about the environment this week, "The earth will not continue to offer its harvest except with faithful stewardship. We cannot say we love the land and then take steps to destroy it for use by future generations." That's a good guess. Good guess. Closer to Al Gore chronologically than Ben Franklin. Pope John Paul II. Actually, Saint John Paul II. He was canonized about 6 or 7 years ago, and in order to be canonized as a saint, you have to have miracles, at least 2 miracles attributed to you, and they were able to make him a saint because they credited him with 2 miraculous healings after he had died. Someone with an aneurysm had prayed before a shrine of him and was healed, and someone else had symptoms of Parkinson's, and the Mother Superior in charge of her convent said, no, don't give up praying, because John Paul has not done interceding, and he became a saint. News you can use. All right, I've repeated the verses from last week. The verses in religion wasn't that big of a deal in the founding of the country. That's where the teaching had gone, and so the people who ran for school board wanted to change that as well. Well, no, quite a few more, but I mentioned these here. The NEA, the largest teachers union, the National Education Association. This was one of the groups that caused grief for the conservatives, the Christian conservatives who tried to get on school boards. Another one was this group, I'm sure you've heard of them, Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Some would say separation of church from state, the way they have operated, but they call themselves nonpartisan and nonsectarian, founded in 1948 by an ACLU lawyer named, or was headed up by Barry Lynn. Have you ever heard of Barry Lynn or seen him on the talk show circuit back in the day? Very prominent person involved in the movement. He was a United Church of Christ minister, very liberal denomination. Think Jeremiah Wright and people like that. So that's that very liberal denomination. And anytime there was any religious expression at all in a public school of any kind, you can guarantee to protest it. They would protest town councils opening meetings in prayer. They would oppose displaying 10 commandments on government property. If you've heard of Roy Moore of Alabama, he tussled with this group more than once. So they helped in getting the Supreme Court to strike down the teaching of intelligent design in a lot of public schools. They protested when the state of Iowa contracted with Prison Fellowship. In 2003, they were providing in-person rehab programs that were really helping the convicts in Iowa. The recidivism rates changed in a good direction, but they protested that the Prison Fellowship Ministry was involved, and so state of Iowa canceled their association with them. They report churches to the IRS if they feel that they become too overly political. This tends to happen, though, in one direction and not both, to be honest. They caused Dr. James Dobson and Focus on the Family all kinds of problems. That's one. The other group, a little more honestly named, I think, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the FFRF. They advertise as atheists, agnostics, and non-theists. They were founded in the mid-'70s, challenged the legitimacy of many faith-based federal and state programs. It's created news on college campuses across the country, and even right here in Springfield. Matter of fact, I'm glad I didn't get to them last week, because on Monday, I'm driving around, turn on the news at the top of the hour, and this group is mentioned, because they were protesting in some state about the kids on the football team or basketball team praying on the court. I'm thinking they've won 2 games all season. Let them pray. These are some recent headlines. Boise State gets rid of football team's chaplain after constitutional concerns. Notice the title of the newsletter that this was published in. They had problems with the team chaplain being on the bus with the team as they were going to play Colorado. So they succeeded in getting Boise State to get rid of the chaplain. And right here in good old Springfield, this was a couple of Christmases ago, You may remember this. Remember when we had the big debate, the big argument over religious displays in the rotunda of the state capitol? Well, the FFRF got involved with that and wanted to have their own display. And so they had this. You can see the nativity scene there on the right, and you see the statue there at the very center of the rotunda. And in the middle, you'll see a poster on an easel, and it says, "At this season of the winter solstice, may reason prevail. There are no gods, no devils, no angels, no heaven or hell. There is only our natural world. Religion is but myth and superstition that hardens hearts and enslaves minds." So happy holidays, everyone. This is not the first time that the rotunda at Christmas has been a hotbed of controversy. A couple of years back, right around the time this was going on, the Satanic Church, I think, had permission to put some sort of a display there. They called it the Snaketivity thing, and this was all because of groups like this that the Church of Satan was able to put a display along with the other religions in our rotunda. Someone else put a Festivus pole. If you're familiar with the Seinfeld show, they wanted to put a Festivus pole there. So after that and the satanic thing and this, there was the airing of grievances all throughout the Capitol. Thank you. One person got that. Okay, so that's just a catching up of what's gone on over the past few years, and it has impacted, the Capitol building even. Christians on the college campus, I don't have time, folks. This is the only screen I have for this. So if you want to write this down, or I can share it with you later, there is all kinds of talk about the persecution of Christians on campus. It is not overblown. It is not understated. This is something that happens constantly. I've shown you, groups at Harvard, groups at all kinds of colleges that are going through this. This one lists 66 different instances. I don't know if that was purposefully done, one for every book of the Bible. But ischristianitytrue.wordpress.com, this was done just a couple of weeks ago. So, on that happy note, I'm moving on to the environment. Now, before the coronavirus hit, if I were to list and rank the issues that cause division in the church today, this one was moving up fast on the ranks. I would still put, gay marriage or the transgender thing, I would still put that at the top. But this one is moving up fast, right there next to style of worship and the color of the carpet. It's moving up fast, right? But coronavirus put an end to that. Now the talk is all about how churches respond and reopening or not, masks or not, the whole thing. That's causing division today. But this issue has really moved up in the ranks. And so what I want to do is just give you a brief historical background to the point where it became a problem that the church paid attention to, and we'll move from there. And again, when I teach on a class, it makes the news. If you've been following the news regarding this group called Project Veritas, they had hidden cameras talking to a CNN reporter. It's always in a restaurant when the CNN reporter is drinking alcohol, and they just open up to this person, not really knowing who they are. It's kind of comical, I guess. But the CNN reporter said, "Oh yeah, we were all about inflating the numbers just to make the news seem more dramatic, and we were all about getting rid of Trump and nothing else. We didn't care about the facts, and now we're going to work on climate change. That's going to be our big push." So even in the news in the past few days, it's been a part of it all. So the church, though, this hasn't really been an issue that the church got involved in until around the mid-20th century, I would say, and a little bit before then, but really more so toward the middle. And, in our early history, there wasn't really that much talk about the environment, certainly not as an issue. We were a wilderness country. All of our literature, a lot of our art was focused on America as a natural beauty country of natural beauty. The famous book Walden by Henry David Thoreau in the mid-1850s that I had to read in high school, and 3 years of my life, or 3 weeks of my life I'll never get back. But for a long time, seemed like years, for a long time, this was not really an issue until, starting with right after the Civil War. After the Civil War, we became an industrial powerhouse, and you had the factories going up, and you had America becoming more urbanized, people moving away from the country and into the city, because that's where the factories were, that's where the jobs were. And so with the rise in factories, you have the rise of pollution and things like that. Churches didn't really focus on the environment then at first, because to the church, the problems of urbanization and industrialization was the squalor that came with it, the rise in crime, the rise in social decay, and those kind of things. And the church focused on that first. And so, along with that comes the push for conservation. And there was a Christian element to that too. We are to be stewards of the earth. We are to conserve. And nobody on either side, really, of the fundamentalist or the modernist, left or right, had an issue with things like Teddy Roosevelt preserving the wildlife and the habitat, or saving 230 million acres to start the national parks, things like that. That wasn't really that controversial. It wasn't in their backyard. It was someplace they'd probably never see, many states away. But he also focused on things like sanitation, that sort of environmental hazard, the quality or lack thereof of food and sewage. That book, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And then his cousin, FDR, comes along with the New Deal and creates things like his alphabet soup of companies or agencies like the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, where they sent 2 million poor young men to work in rural areas, mainly on conservation. And these are some of the groups that formed back then. I'm still humming the theme as I see that National Geographic logo. But, and these were fairly conservative, fairly traditional at the time, groups that were focused on conservation. Then, toward the middle of the 20th century, things shifted. And I especially want to point out 1945. What happened in 1945 that would cause Christians to be concerned about the environment? The atomic bomb, very good. So America drops 2 atomic bombs on Japan to end the war in 1945. And this caused 2 problems in the church. The first problem was the obvious, is this moral, is this immoral for us dropping bombs on Japan? There was a big theological debate. People saying, yes, it's a horrible thing. We've lost the moral high ground in doing this, and we've committed a crime against humanity. And the other side saying, we were actually saving lives, because if we hadn't have done that, who knows how many thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of Americans would have died trying to end the war. This was a quote from a Navy Reserve chaplain. I submit that the problem is not the control of the atom, but of Adam. We do not stand in terror of a thing, but of ourselves. In this subterfuge of speaking about the atom, we simply give credence to the words of Jeremiah, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. So, just very briefly, I could teach a whole class, or someone else could, on the environment in the church, but I'm just going to run down a few events here that with each succeeding one, cause the church, cause the believer to think a little more each time about what's our role in the environment and how are we failing the earth. So in 1954, there was a hydrogen bomb test in the Bikini Atoll, and a Japanese fishing crew was exposed to some radioactive fallout from testing the bomb. Now it's an environmental issue because people are getting radiation after effects. 1962, another milestone. This book called Silent Spring by Rachel Carson was all about pesticide poisoning, specifically DDT. And, it's great because it controls malaria, but on the other hand, it's known to cause cancer and harm ocean life. This next one is very, very fascinating for me. In this 1968, I don't know how many of you have heard of this book or read it. Has anyone heard of the book, The Population Bomb? A few of you have. Interesting title, too, given what we just talked about. But Paul Ehrlich wrote this book based on this 1700s philosopher named Malthus about the population bomb. And his argument was, as Malthus's argument, our food supply grows mathematically. 1 bushel 1 year, maybe we can bump that up to 2, and then 3, and then 4. The human population grows exponentially, 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16. And after a while, this growth is going to outgrow our capacity to feed all these people. So we're going to have an overpopulation problem, and we need to do something about that. Here's a quote: "We must rapidly bring the world population under control, reducing the growth rate to 0 or making it negative. Conscious regulation of human numbers must be achieved. Simultaneously, we must, at least temporarily, greatly increase our food production. And of course, America is to blame. We should take the lead because we consume the most." But some of the things he wanted to do was to put temporary sterilants in our water supply and our food supply to make us incapable of reproducing. Higher taxes for families when they have more children. I love that child tax credit I get every year. That's not why we had 5 kids, but it helps. And this guy wants to say higher taxes if you have more kids. Luxury taxes on child care goods. Give you a monetary incentive if you get sterilized. And my personal favorite, prenatal sex discernment. Because families often continue to have children until a male is born, he suggested if they could choose a male child, this would reduce the birth rate. So laws should be enacted guaranteeing the right to an abortion. And he blames the Catholics for being criminally irresponsible for not supporting birth control. So, if you're going to keep trying until you have a boy, then you should get the abortion until you have one and then stop. That's worked wonders for China, if you know anything about that. So, the problem with this, he's wanting to control the population. He's wanting to control it in areas that are becoming overpopulated. And if you take a look, those populations are not Caucasian. They're in other parts of the world, and so he was roundly criticized for trying to bring back what you call eugenics, or the selective breeding or lack thereof of certain areas geographically, certain races. And so he was roundly criticized for that. And this, of course, became an issue that churches talked about. 1969, there was an oil spill in California, and even the pictures coming back from the Apollo missions about Earth gave people the sense that our planet is so tiny in a huge universe, and we need to do a better job of taking care of it. Now for some stuff you're more familiar with. 1970, the first Earth Day, April 22nd. I knew nothing about this at all until I went to college. And then it was all I heard about when I went to college, was Earth Day. So this is an event. How many of you were at college and you had the Earth Day going on? Remember that, some of you? This was a big thing when I was in college, every April 22nd. They say they chose April 22nd because they wanted the highest number of college students to participate. Spring break's over. They don't have exams during that week usually. So that's why they picked that particular day. It caused a little suspicion when people realized that April 22nd, 1970 was Vladimir Lenin's 100th birthday. But who would have thought? And then in the 70s, other things. And again, as these things keep happening, the church gets more and more concerned about the state of our planet. Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, EPA founded under Nixon, and then 3 Mile Island, which I'm old enough to remember. nuclear freeze, Chernobyl, acid rain in the 80s. So all these different events, building on top of each other. So the past 40 years have seen a rise in Christian-based activism in the environmental movement. And it's taken root in a, no pun intended, I just wrote that and I just now noticed. It's taken root in conservative evangelical denominations as well as the more liberal ones that you would expect this to be a part of. And I want to list a couple of them here. This is how the environmental movement has become more of an issue for different denominations. And again, I'm not saying that we don't have a role to be good stewards of the earth. The problem, as I've said in the past with social gospel, is that when you take on other agendas, your primary agenda of reaching out for the lost, the Great Commission, tends to get shunted aside more often than not. So it's important to find that balance, and it is a thin green line often. So Catholics, a lot of environmental activists in the Catholic Church. Pope Francis endorses climate action, as did St. John Paul II. It's an eco-Jesuit. I thought that was interesting, a website for environmentally minded Jesuits. Pope Francis is quoted, "Take good care of creation. St. Francis wanted that. People occasionally forgive, but nature never does. If we don't take care of the environment, there's no way of getting around it." In 2006, the Presbyterian Church USA had a carbon neutral resolution that was passed at their General Assembly, strongly urging all Presbyterians to immediately aspire to live carbon neutral lives. It was the first in the world by a major religious denomination, first resolution for its followers to become climate neutral. Mormons are altering their meeting houses now to be more environmentally friendly. You can see the temple there. They're starting to redo a lot of theirs to include solar power in them. There's a verse in the Mormon Doctrines and Covenants, "And it pleaseth God that he hath given all these things unto man, for unto this end were they made to be used, with judgment, not to excess, neither by extortion." SDA, anyone know what that is? What denomination? Seventh-day Adventist, very good. They had a statement on stewardship of the environment, advocating a simple, wholesome lifestyle where people don't step on the treadmill of unbridled overconsumption, accumulation of goods, and production of waste. We call for a reformation of lifestyle based on respect for nature, restraint in the use of the world's resources, reevaluation of one's needs, and reaffirmation of the dignity of created life. And even the Southern Baptist Convention has some different factions among the ranks about how we care for the planet, to what extent we should go in doing that. The Southern Baptist Environment and Climate Initiative is based there. There is even a Green Bible. This was published back in 2008 by HarperCollins of Zondervan Publishing. It was English version of the NRSV. All passages mentioning the environment are printed in green ink. And this was endorsed by the Sierra Club, Humane Society, and the Eco Justice Program. I won't go there. HarperCollins said, the Bible has more passages about the environment than it does love. So this is a study Bible. They don't alter verses in this. They don't change words around. It's a study Bible. The foreword is by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and it has essays in it from people like St. John Paul II, Brian McLaren of the Emerging Church, and N.T. Wright. So it's a study Bible. Nothing inherently wrong with study Bibles. I saw one of there's a Founding Fathers study Bible. It talks about American patriotism, and I didn't confuse John the Baptist with John Hancock there, or doubting Thomas Jefferson. I had to throw that in there. But the Green Bible is meant to, and this is a quote, equip and encourage readers to see God's vision for creation and help them engage in the work of healing and sustaining it. So, this is printed on recycled paper. They use soy-based ink. They made the cover from renewable cotton linen. But one of the critics of this said, yes, it's important, but when they asked Jesus what was most important, he said, love your God and love your neighbor as yourself. He didn't say anything about creation. All right, I'm just blazing through this. Does anybody have any questions before I move on to the key point here? Okay, all right. So here's the debate that's taking place in the church today. And I have to be honest and have a little discomfort here because I'm trying to find that line as well. I think the problem is, you don't want to go too far to where environmentalism becomes a separate religion. And I've seen that happen and happening. But you don't want to neglect the need so much that whatever problems exist keep getting worse. So that we are to be stewards of God's creation is not debatable. But how far is too far? At what point does environmental activism involve worshiping the creation instead of the Creator? There's also a debate, how serious is the problem truly? Is it urgent? Because I've heard for the past 20 years, we only have 5 years, right? But there are some issues. Is the current climate the result of human activity, or is it just the natural way of things? These questions have divided the church, and not just the church, but the world in recent years. Because they're not just religious, they're political. And that might be part of the problem as well. So looking at both sides of this, there are critiques that happen for both sides. Let's look at how the right is criticized, how the conservative church is criticized, and some reactions or thoughts about it. Whenever I read or hear about Christians being criticized for not being strong enough on environmental change, climate change, what have you, here are the things that I hear or read. The right doesn't care about the environment because of their eschatology. Now you're thinking, what in the world does that have to do with how I feel about the environment? Here's their argument. We have our own view about the end times. We know from the Bible how God has planned for the world to end, and so we're just not that alarmed by global warming or glaciers melting or anything like that because we don't have to worry about it. We know what the prophecy holds for our religion. That's a criticism of us. We don't have to worry about that. We're criticized. This earth will be completely annihilated and a new earth created. There's no reason to care about something that will necessarily be destroyed. This is a quote from the left. And the conviction that given the limited amount of time left, Christians should be single-mindedly devoted to converting people to faith in Christ. Anything else would be simply a distraction. That's one complaint, our end times belief. That's why we don't care about the earth. Not caring about the environment is to engage in environmental racism. This is what's known as environmental justice or climate justice. And here's the point they make with environmental justice, environmental racism. You're thinking, how can environmental problems be racist? Here's the explanation. In a lot of cities, countries, what have you, it's the poor neighborhoods that are saddled with the waste dumps, the incinerators, the gas tank farms that would never be tolerated in areas where land's more expensive. You wouldn't put this smokestack or factory in Naperville or Ladue or Piper Glen, It would be in a poor area, and that's mostly, again, non-Caucasian areas where you're going to find this. And so they make a link between the environment and racism. Now, this is kind of a which came first, the chicken or the egg thing, because are the facilities put there because they're poor, or do these places become poor because the facilities were put there? Who knows? But there is a tie in to the poor being affected because it's hard for them to grow crops. There are water shortages and things of that sort, food scarcity. But I look at the famine that takes place in some of these countries, and like in Africa, for example, you have a drought that encompasses a multitude of countries in Africa, if you look, it's really the ones that have totalitarian governments, socialist governments, where food is used as a weapon, where this is a problem. And you can have a neighboring country that's more of a democracy, and there's no problem. But the issue seems to be environmental racism or environmental justice. You'll be seeing that a lot more. We are climate change deniers, those who are on the right. We think that big business is greater than the Bible. We're more interested in protecting big business than in doing our duty regarding stewardship. And of course, we're more concerned about owning the libs. That's a phrase. Owning the libs than about stewardship. Someone on the left could make a great point about stewardship or environmentalism, and we are just so stubborn that we're not going to listen because it came from someone on the left. That's a criticism. Some of the groups that do the critiquing. There's the Evangelical Climate Initiative, launched in 2006 by 86 notable evangelical leaders. They called all Christians to push for federal legislation regarding reducing carbon dioxide emissions. They made a convert out of Pat Robertson, even. Making a convert out of me, he said. Even the Christian Coalition today, it still exists, but now it's being funded by a lot of climate groups. The Evangelical Environmental Network, and their ministry, their youth ministry called the Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. This group, the YECA, is very active on a lot of college campuses, including Greenville, including Cedarville. I don't know if Kurt and Kim are here, but that's in Ohio, their college. These groups are involved there, and they participated in a climate strike a couple of years back. This is the one that Greta Thunberg, if you remember the girl from Sweden. So they were doing climate strikes in about a dozen different colleges, and they used the phrase creation care to indicate the religious basis of the project. This is an ad that the Evangelical Environmental Network came out with 20 years ago. What would Jesus drive? Promoting fuel-efficient cars. You know it'd be able to go over water, but I don't know about the rest of it, so. Sorry, I had to do that. Okay, so that's the critique of the right. What's the critique of the other side? The critique of the left is that this whole movement, this whole concern for the environment is really Marxism masquerading as concern for the environment. If you look at the people behind it, it gets very suspicious. And it's not just because they do Earth Day on Lenin's birthday. It had nothing to do with that, right? Environmental theology was birthed from the liberation theology I talked about, where, the oppressed nations of South America and elsewhere have a different view of God than you and I do because of their experience. And the black church, African American church, has taken up the environmental theology, liberation theology banner in a lot of cases. Not all, but a lot of them. And so there's a complaint that this is really Marxism because it's all about government taking over things, assuming control of the means of production and whatnot. There's also the notion, I don't have it here, but the people who criticize the right and talk about this and preach it don't practice what they preach. I'm thinking specifically of leaders who talk about the need to reduce our carbon footprint while they fly from speech to speech in private jets, or talking about the virtues of socialism from one of their 3 homes, things of that sort. Evangelicals can't address this issue without slipping into leftist politics. There are a lot of people in the environmental movement who are also very avidly pro-abortion. And I'm not saying by any stretch that if you are concerned about the environment, you're also pro-abortion. That is not at all what I'm saying. I am saying that a lot of people involved in the environmental movement are also in the pro-choice movement because of overpopulation and other issues like that they feel are important and have an environmental message. So the message here is one of caution. Certain features of it are idolatrous or pantheistic, worshiping nature. I'm thinking specifically of things like the New Age movement. Certain features are violent, the notions of eco-terrorists. And I'm just really flying through this. But those who critique the left. I really just have one group here, but it's a very influential group. They're called the Cornwall Alliance. And this was a group that was formed about 20 years ago, made a statement called the Cornwall Declaration on Environmental Stewardship, stating that all human beings should be regarded as producers and stewards rather than consumers and polluters. And their open letter to the group on the left included signatories such as Chuck Colson, Dr. James Dobson, Rabbi Jacob Neusner, R.C. Sproul, and D. James Kennedy. Names you've all heard of. And they produced a documentary, a book and a documentary called Resisting the Green Dragon. And criticizing the left and the evangelicals in the environmental movement for being more concerned about things like cap and trade than the Great Commission. I have flown through that, and I apologize for the need to do so, but I wanted to get to that. Yes, Scott?
Just one point with the aspect of environmental justice. Now is it going now to the point of doing funding grants or any federal money consideration? They're looking if the applicant lives in environmental justice zone or boundaries. And if they are, they get extra points or more favorable to receive federal funds. So it's going beyond just recognizing that. They're implementing this through the aspect of how the grants are considered and how they're issued to get money to these.
So they're partitioning America into zones that are environmental justice boundaries. Yes?
I don't agree with PCUSA on much of anything, but I found that statement that you showed, at least the excerpt you showed, to be fairly measured and reasonable. I'd be curious, what do you think of that PCUSA statement?
I'll have to go back to it.
Maybe, it's an excerpt, so it may not give the full context. I completely understand the idea that you can worship the creation rather than the creator, but it seems, they're urging, they're not demanding, they're not saying this is obligatory. This sounds like stewardship, I guess.
Yeah, you can make the case that that's stewardship. And I included it here because it was the first, they were the first ones to do it. I can't say I've read the whole thing. I don't know about immediately aspiring to live carbon neutral lives because I am not that knowledgeable about the extent of carbon neutral as an issue. And it may very well be that this is right on point. So I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that, but I basically put it there because they were the first ones to start this, and they certainly were not the last.
Brian, the other way to become total carbon neutral is for all life to disappear. So, as we all
The only way for carbon neutral is for all life to disappear.
Right.
So yeah, I'd be against that. And that's another thing too, that one of the things that gets lost in this is if we do all they tell us to do, it's really going to impact or harm the poor more than it is the rest of us. I remember, if you mess up, you can pay for a carbon credit or something, and that's almost like an indulgence, if you will, something that we can do pretty easily. But to be fair, I'm going to look that up. I'm going to read the whole thing and report next week about, kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Brian, the carbon neutral or carbon credits gives comfort to the people that are polluting more. It's sort of like those ways to give back to society. I can give money to this carbon banking initiative. Al Gore was in that big
A feel-good kind of a thing?
That way, I don't feel as guilty with impacting the environment if I can give credit or give money to these banks.
I will say this, and I'm not going to debate the merits or lack thereof of the Paris Accord that we just rejoined. But it seems like the United States and other developing, fully developed countries, I should say, were the ones targeted for criticism. And if you look at the greatest offenders, the biggest polluters, they are the Chinas of the world who are not a part of that. So it's like if I would have been bullied in high school by a couple of guys and passed a petition to everyone saying, let's sign this petition against bullying, and everybody signed it except the two bullies. That's really not going to solve my problem. So that's, as Forrest would say, that's all I have to say about that. So, and it feels weird to say this, but next week we'll get into alcohol, drugs, and gambling. So I'm going to have a packed house next week. And we'll get with the culture wars and talk about, start on the abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, that whole thing. Thank you for hanging in there with me. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for the link.
Yeah.